Moin, I'm Catherine, and I'm still in bed with Laura.
Still here.
Yes.
It's wonderful.
We just did an amazing interview, and we did a book talk about Tell the Wolves I'm Home. I'm going to link both videos in the corner, so go watch them. And now we are going to talk about What I Loved by... How do you pronounce it in English?
I would say Siri Hustvedt.
Because I studied Swedish, so I would say Hustvedt. But
yours is probably
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if how deep her roots go.
Right, if there's an Americanized version.
So if she calls herself Siri Hustvedt, we had the same problem with the author, with Carol Rifka Brunt. We don't know. Like, we're pros. We're pros.
And my full last name, so Zak is like my creative last name, but my full last name is Laura Zak. It's a long Polish name.
Okay.
So my whole life, and so the proper pronunciation, I believe, would have been Walrusek, but it turned into Laura Zak.
Yeah. So you also, so you and your parents pronounce it like...
Yeah, Laura Zak. But I've had a whole life of people always mispronouncing my last name, so... Yeah. Yeah. It's okay. I feel like I'm allowed to do it.
Sorry if you got it wrong.
Yeah, apologies.
Apologies. Can you shortly tell us what the novel is about?
Sure. It's definitely a big one, but I'd say the short version is it's about an art historian. It's told from the point of view of an art historian who was very close friends with a couple, the man of whom was a painter, and the woman who was an academic. And it's sort of a novel that goes across many decades of their friendship and their lives, and including their children, and it just kind of deals with art and loss and grief and sociopathy. Yeah, it's hard to easily summarize.
Yeah, because there's just so much.
Yes, it's dense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Same question as before. What was it for you on a personal level? Mm-hmm. Like, what was the aspect that interested you the most?
I think this idea of, which this is the piece that I think also was true of the last book we talked about, Tell the Wolves I'm Home, is this idea of mixing that they talk about at one point in the book, where the painter, Bill, the first paintings that the narrator describes are portraits of the woman that becomes his wife, Violet, but he calls them self-portraits, even though they're pictures of her. And there's always a detail in the painting that suggests the viewer.
Yeah, and like there's a shadow in the picture.
And so, and it talks about how interesting it is that he would call a portrait of a woman a self-portrait, and there's this kind of balance of the masculine and the feminine, and the presence of that duality of man and woman in his painting. And then that ends up translating to the book itself and the characters, where it's these two married couples who have this intense friendship, and the ways that we see their influence on each other overlapping, and the way they impact one another's marriages and personalities. And then I think, is it okay to spoil some of it? It's hard to talk about it.
Yeah, because something happens that's
there's a death.
That's a death. Yeah.
There's a death, and the person who dies still, very much impacts the story after they have died.
Yes.
And so I thought that was really effective and powerful in the book. And I also really liked, this is maybe not so much the personal level, but in general, I really liked how I thought it was going to be one type of book, and it kind of took a turn when it becomes more suspenseful. Like, I didn't know that was going to be part of the story. It kind of became like a mystery for a moment, but in a very sort of highbrow intellectual way.
But what I love about Siri Hustvedt is I'm a very critic. I mean, in my book talks I only talk about, or in my book videos I only talk about books I like mostly. But in books that I don't like, one of the main aspects sometimes is intellectual jerking off, is what I call it. Like,
there's definitely a lot of that,
and that's I think it's a thin line, exactly. And I think Siri Hustvedt managed to bring so many ideas into this. There's so much in there, and it still doesn't feel like intellectual jerking off. I mean, it is very intense, but I think you can read
it's earned. Like, each character has their own special area of interest
Yeah.
that they kind of have an expertise around, and she explores that way,
Yes.
like different ideas and thoughts and artists and writers, but in a way that would be like as if you were an academic studying that specific thing.
Yeah.
It's not like excessive.
No, and you can still read the novel without having any clue about art, although
Right.
it's a lot about art. So you don't feel you just don't feel stupid if
Right.
you
And the
never thought about
descriptions
things.
of the art was very
Detailed,
Yeah,
very
and beautiful,
intense,
and
I
yeah.
mean to come up with those ideas for those,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's being like 4 different persons and having 4 different ideas. That's very interesting. But I love that you mentioned the thing about the mixing, because like Violet, the later wife of the painter,
right.
or artist, she also writes about hysteria. And then she, like in the 19th century, and then she goes to that eating disorders and anorexia are like a similar symptom, but like for the 20th century.
Right.
And I just thought it's very interesting, because there's one point where she says that she feels like for those mostly girls who are anorexic, it's a problem of overmixing, that they don't know where their barriers are and
Right.
like the influences they get from the outside, and so they try to shut down all of their bodily openings. And I thought that was such a
Yeah, and it was interesting that, so in her case, there is a stepson, Mark was her stepson, who she is very close to, who develops behavioral issues that become more and more extreme as the book goes on, and that the narrator is having to deal with as well. And it was just interesting how like her life ended up almost mimicking her work, or her life kind of guided her work, but the areas that she was interested in then ended up becoming relevant
for her own life regarding Mark. I thought so too. But I said I didn't have any personal questions for this, but let's keep to the anorexia, because that's like a huge problem in Hollywood, isn't it? Did you?
I'm probably. I feel like I'm still like enough on the periphery. I've been so much in the indie world. Like I'm starting to, like I'm writing for and doing voice acting on a Netflix show now, and I worked on an Amazon show. So I'm starting to get more into, I guess, what you would call the mainstream. But I still feel like a lot of my specific perspective has been not necessarily typical
Hollywood.
Yeah, so I don't know that I have like the most accurate perspective, but I'm still want to hear your question.
No, it's just that do you start to feel the pressure the more mainstream you get, or do you feel that around you the pressure, especially for women, to uphold a specific body type?
I mean, I definitely think that beauty standards are a thing and a major pressure on performers, and especially anyone who's going to be on camera. It's kind of unavoidable to feel that in yourself to some degree. I think I was lucky to have parents and a mother who had a pretty healthy relationship with body and food, and didn't pick apart or obsess over or talk about my body or weight a lot. And I think that ended up being really helpful, creating a sort. I mean, of course, I've gone through my stages of being more insecure or fixated on it, but I think that does go a long way, regardless of your industry. Like I think even people who aren't actresses or in Hollywood struggle with the same thing.
Absolutely, it's very widespread, like disease, if you want. I mean, it's a disease.
But I mean, I still, when I'm gonna be like doing a role, I'll still be more attentive to
that's what I mean,
my exercise and my food. So even if I say like, oh no, I'm so healthy, thanks mom, I'm still affected just as much as anyone. I
mean, there's so many actresses, when I watch them on TV, I just feel like I want to feed you, I want to give you something to eat, because it's like it's like so obvious that it's not healthy the way they look, like, and not healthy in like the mainstream health hype that's going on, but just really, really physically not healthy.
Right, but then also you have to step back into the like, is the feminist perspective to accept all women's body types and not scrutinize regardless of, you know, how small or how large.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's
Yeah,
so
but for
hard
me,
to
like,
parse out.
I'm working in health.
Okay.
For me, there's like the distinction of when it really becomes an illness.
Right.
And
there's
definitely a psychological problem going with it. And it's not just like a question of how thin or...
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's the difference for me. Was there anything that you especially liked about the book?
I thought it was really... I thought it was just impressive, like all the things we've already talked about of how much she addresses, how evocative the descriptions are, and how fully realized the characters are. I thought it was really well written, and also what I said before of how unexpected it was, and also the way it ends up resolving later. Like, I guess I never was able to accurately predict what was going to happen. Yeah. And I feel like the way it resolved was kind of sad, but also realistic. Yeah. Like, it felt like it could have easily gone in a more extreme direction, especially when it brings in the characters of Mark and his intense New York artist friend who seems dangerous and a bad influence. Like, that could have gone to a much more extreme place that I feel like there was a lot of restraint that I liked about it.
Yeah, me too. Also, but I didn't realize when I read it, I'm not sure if I realized it because I already was into like gender discussion when I read the first time, that there is so much gender fluency. Despite there being
all heterosexual. Well, actually, that's not true. There is with Mark a little bit more queerness.
Oh, and also Violet.
Oh yeah, that's true. Oh, I forgot about that part where there was the line about she shared her bed with women and men. Yeah. But given that the main characters that are centered are heterosexual on their face, but there's still like something about the friendships as well that are queer, like the narrator's relationship to Bill and the women's relationship together, Violet and Erica. Like, there was an intimacy there.
And like, also speaking about mixing, like in the end, there's also some mixing going on between Violet and Bill, the artist, and then the attraction of the narrator for her. So it also mixes, like, if there is an attraction also to him and the closeness.
And I kind of liked that. I'm going to try to say this in a way that doesn't spoil.
Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah,
I know.
But I do like that we weren't necessarily fully given what we wanted in terms of the love story. Yeah. Like, there was something, again, realistically unresolved about it, but still beautiful, but still able to be expressed, but it didn't have to take a certain form to still be true, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we did it. I think we did. Any last words? Also, a 5-star read for me, because I already said that I don't give out 5 stars a lot of the times, as for Tell the Blues I'm Home. And yeah, if you want to read a book that like
challenges you. There was definitely a couple of moments. You asked in the last book talk about if I cry. I didn't cry in this book, but there were a couple moments that I like exclaimed out loud. I was reading it next to my housemate at one point, and I was just like, and she's like, what? What's going on? And it's like, I can't explain. You know, I was like this far into the book, like, you had to be there. You know, like, I don't know where to begin. And so I just ended up being like, this book just really likes killing people. And she's like, oh, got it.
I sat here yesterday and read. And then I talked to Sophia, just so you know, because I knew what was happening because I read it before. I just told Sophia, okay, just so you don't wonder what's going on, I'm going to cry in a few moments.
Oh, did it happen?
Actually, not at that moment, but at some later moment than it actually, because after I said it, I knew that I would, so it didn't happen. But
it's a good sign that you're in the world.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. Didn't you? No, let's just wrap it up. We're going to meet again. We're going.
Wait, what was the question? Don't leave me hanging. What was the question? man.
No, you said that there were so many parallels for you in those two books.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there were the surface level of they're both about male artist painters who may or may not die. And
I mean, one week we're all mortal. We die at some point.
Exactly. Yeah, they both will die at some point.
Exactly.
And about the effect of the loss of them, hypothetically, and the legacy of their art, and also the mixing. The mixing was very present
in both of those. Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, almost explicitly so until The Wolves I'm Home, with her starting to realize that Toby, one of her uncle's partner, was actually the person responsible for a lot of what she loved about her uncle.
Yep.
And then also how she feels like she loves Toby in the same way she loves her uncle by the end. So yeah, just that kind of, and then also about what an impact these formative people are for her and who she's going to become and how she's going to love and what she's going to look for in romantic partners.
And I also think like the intensity, how those friendships, like also, I mean, that is something that I took from this book I love novels about friendship, and like there are very intense friendships in here, and they are the description of the friendships and the feeling of the people to each other. It's like so intense and so beautiful. It's just really, really beautiful, those friendships, and like how important those friendships that like stretch through the almost their whole like adult lives.
Yeah, it's almost like their life began when they became friends.
Yeah. I mean, it's because the story.
Well, yeah, and that's the story he's telling.
You actually feel like it. Yeah. And that's just.
And he ends up. Well, I won't say that, but it makes you think about how even if you might be alone at some point later in your life, you still have the comfort of how the friendship lasts beyond someone's life.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's a very, very beautiful ending. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think on that note, let's say bye to the internet. Watch all the other videos. And
goodbye, internet. Thank you.
Bye. Moin, I'm Catherine, and I'm still in bed with Laura Zak, which is super exciting.
For me as well. Moin.
The most important thing for this interview is that we are at El Beach Festival. That leads us to the first typical in bed with interview question.
Okay.
What happened last night?